I thought the summer dress would be a fun little exercise to show you how to create flared silhouettes and rotate darts. Then I decided to add a low back neckline.
Hi, welcome to Pattern Making with Lee. In today's tutorial, I'll share a cautionary tale
On drafting straight necklines, show you how to create flared silhouettes by rotating darts and sculpting the side seams, and I'll introduce you to contouring.
Adding a low V neckline might seem like a really simple thing to do, but whenever you change the neckline on a pattern, you need to contour it so it fits the body perfectly. And if you're wondering what contouring is, don't worry, you're not alone. Most fashion students have not done a lot of contouring. It often gets overlooked. It's actually a really important pattern making skill. And I'll explain more as I go along, but for now, know that to do that low V neckline on the back, I had to contour my pattern in 4 different locations. So you'll learn a lot about contouring in this video, and I'll show you different ways to remove the contouring excess. And I was actually able to use this contouring excess as a design opportunity too. So let's get started.
In this demonstration, I'll be using my CLIQD Torso Block, which you can get on my website, CLIQDPatternKits.com.
And I'd recommend getting the PDF version. If I can, I'll always use a block when I create patterns. It just speeds up the pattern making process. And if you have a PDF, rather than tracing it, you can just print it off and use it again and again for different designs. Plus tracing gets pretty boring after a while.
I'm cutting around the neck and armhole of the front and back pieces and leaving a bit of space at the side seams to extend it out. I like to draw my neckline pretty early in the pattern making process, so I have my parameters and my design, and I find it much quicker to draw the neckline on the mannequin or a body. Firstly, it's easier for me to visualize. Secondly, it's more accurate. I'll smooth my lines and see the top here. My neckline looks straight, but in order to do that, it actually has to curve over the shoulder here.
I guess this is kind of an optical illusion. I never will be able to guess this line if I draw it on flat pattern making. So my advice when you're doing any pattern making is to work back and forth from the mannequin and on the table. Don't wait until you make your toile. Working back and forth allows you to get more accurate lines much faster.
I'll add some seam allowances and notches to the neckline. Now I'm going to add a bit of flare to my side seam. This block fits my measurements pretty well, so I'm going to extend the side seam by 0.5 centimeters at the bust, so I have a bit of ease, but I want the side seam to flare out, so I'll add 3 centimeters to the hip. Then I'll mark the same points on my front. Before I connect them, I'm going to add flare to the front by closing half the bust dart and transferring the excess down to the hem. This dart rotation is what's creating the volume at the front here, kind of vertically down from the bust. If you want to learn more about rotating darts, watch the video that just popped up. I'll leave a link in the description too. Then I'll drop the armhole down to the bust line, which is where I like to finish looser dresses. Now I can draw the side seam. I'll start on the back because there's no dart, which makes it a bit easier to draft. I'll just pause here for a second.
I want to accentuate the flare of the silhouette, so rather than drawing a straight line between the bust or armhole and the hip, I'm going to curve it in slightly. This will help me accentuate the flare.
I'll mark a point here to help me draft my lines, and I'll connect the point to the bust and hip points. Now I have this ugly angle here, which I'll smooth over until I create a nice smooth line that curves in slightly.
I don't really have a rule for this, so what I'm doing here, but in general I'd say looser silhouettes shouldn't be too fit at the side seam. The curve should be very subtle. And secondly, trust yourself. You don't need to be an expert to know when a line looks funny.
You can see my original line was too angular, and now it looks like it would be a flattering side seam. Then I'll add some paper and extend the hem so it finishes about 45 centimeters from the waist, and I'll draw a horizontal line out from the 45 centimeter point, and I'll measure 45 centimeters along the side seam from the waist point. Now, what do you think about this hem?
If you've ever seen a flared skirt pattern or any sort of flared pattern really, you'll know the hem's looking a bit off. It's not curving up enough the side seam. When you have a flared silhouette, the side seam ends up on the bias, so it will drop, the fabric will drop when it's sewn. So in order to counteract that, you need to raise the hem at the side seam. You can do this when you create your toile and actually see how much your fabric drops, but I know from experience
that taking about 2.5 centimeters, so 1 inch, should be enough. And look how nice the hem looks now. Then I'll add my side seam allowances and drop the armhole down to the bust line so it matches the front. And that's the back pattern done. Now let's do the front side seam. The quickest way to get the same shape on the front is to close the dart, then lie the back pattern on top of the front. Before I trace, I'll double check my hip and bust points are aligned. After I trace the line, I'll grab my tracing wheel and trace over the dart. This will transfer the seam to the dart excess, so I have the right shape. The back already had the seam allowances added, so now I'll add the seam allowances to the front. For the hem, I'll add some paper and copy the hem shape from the back near the side seam. Then I'll mark 45 centimeters down from the waist at the center and connect the 2 points to create a nice smooth line. And that's the front done. Now let's cut it out in calico and see how it's looking. As expected, the back neckline is gaping quite a bit, so I'll need to contour it.
Quick note before I start contouring, just so you know, this V-back neckline is never going to sit next to the body. My silhouette's too loose. What I'm trying to achieve here with the contouring is stop the neckline from flapping open and also stop anyone staring down on my underwear.
To contour the back, I'll place a pin at the center back to secure it. I'll start at the top. A quick way to remove excess at the neck is to redraw the shoulder seam. You can't see what I'm pinning here, but I'll show you when I create the pattern later. Then I'll smooth the fabric up till I reach the point where there's the most amount of excess. Then I'll pin a wedge out. I haven't pinned all the way across the fabric. I'm just pinning to where the excess is finishing. I want to bring the base of the neckline in so it's close to the body, otherwise everyone will be able to look down and see my underwear. So I'm going to pin out a wedge here, finishing around the hip, which is my widest point.
Now I don't want to continue this line below the hip. If I go below the hip, it'll make the hip circumference smaller, which I don't want. I just want to taper it above the hip to the waist. So create a little triangle there. But now I've got a problem because I need to get rid of this excess, but I don't have a center back seam and I don't want a dart. So what do?
I'll have to close the excess and transfer it down to the hem. It's like rotating a dart, and this will create extra flare along the hem here. That's why I'm cutting into my toile and adding extra fabric at the hem. It's a bit of guesswork because I need to check how much excess I can actually remove when I do the pattern later, but I'm just getting an idea of how the flare will look at the center back at the hem. Then I'll redraw the neckline and the armhole. You can see the armhole is way off where it should be. The neckline made the back open and swing out across the back. And one last little bit of contouring. I want the neckline to sit closer to the lower back, so I'm just going to pin out a wedge here and finish around the waistline. When I create my pattern, I'll close this excess and transfer it down to the hem, like I did with the center back and like I did with the bust dart on the front. If you're confused, don't worry, I'll show you on the pattern later. Now, I'll lay my front pattern over my toile and copy the new armhole line I drew. That's all I need to do on the front, so let's go to the back and start at the top. By re-angling the shoulder seam, this will remove about 1 centimeter, so 3/8 of an inch of excess at the top and make it fit closer to the body. Before I redraw that back armhole, I'll get my front and check where it's finishing so my seams are the same length. Then I'll get my back toile, line top of my pattern and transfer the new armhole line to the pattern. To remove the next contouring excess, I'll line my pattern on top of my toile and mark where the wedge starts and ends. Draw the lines on my pattern and close it. Then I'll copy the new neckline to my pattern and mark where the third contouring excess is. I'll draw the wedge on my pattern too, and as you can see, it's going into the middle of nowhere. I don't want to put a dart in my pattern, so I'll create a slash line vertically down to the hem and rotate the excess down there. It's exactly the same thing as rotating darts.
And I'm actually very excited about this contouring excess. When you rotate a bust dart down to add flare at the front, often the back can look quite flat in comparison, but with this contouring excess, I can now add some flare to the center of the back there, so it'll look even on the front and back, which will look great.
And back to the demo, I'll mark the amount of excess I ideally want to remove at the center back line. Then I'll stick some paper on it and put my ruler so it's touching the excess mark and my hip line. Wait, I've got a problem. This is basically what my back pattern looks like, and the center back is on the folds as there's no seam. If I want to remove this wedge and not add a dart or seam, I need to extend this wedge line down to the hem so the line stays straight, which is great. Excess is gone and I've added some flare. But look at the top half. I've gone past the center back line, so I wouldn't be able to cut it.
Life is all about compromise, so I couldn't remove all the excess I wanted.
I'll line my pattern up against these handy lines on my table and work out how much excess I can remove without the upper back going across the center back line. Then I'll draw over the neckline I traced earlier and cut along it. Okay, time for another toile. Let's cut out in calico and I'll try it on me this time. Okay, the back neckline is looking good. I'm happy with the silhouette, but the armhole is still swinging too far over the back. In fact, let's bring the shoulder seam in and make it a bit more flattering. Using that shoulder seam mark as a starting point, I redrew the armholes, put my toile on the fold, and now I'll cut along these new lines. Yes, looking much better now. Woo! Look at the back. This armhole is a bit curvy at the top, the front, but that's an easy fix. But what is that? I've got some more contouring to do. I'll put on the mannequin to make it a bit easier. Oh, it's quite big, but it's not going to go all the way across, so I can't just take out a wedge and close it. So I'll unpin my shoulder seam and just smooth the excess into it. This will shift the piece across, so I need to redraw the neckline, and I'll add some fabric to this armhole and redraw that too. And this is how the back is looking, which I'm pretty happy with. Then I'll remove my toile and make this update to my back armhole. Then the front armhole and neckline. When I'm done, I'll trim my shoulder seam to make sure it's the same length. I also need to move the shoulder seam notch on the front. Remember how the whole front shifted? Well, I need to update the shoulder seam notch too. The pattern is done. I'll cut out my final fabric, sew it up, and I'm done. I'm pretty happy with this pattern. It's a good balance of being fitted in the right places, but relaxed and comfy. Think I'll make some more.
This is one of a million dresses you can make using the torso block. Head to my website and get the PDF version so you can print it again and again for different designs. And for more DIY pattern tutorials, check out these next videos. Also, if you'll make your own pattern, make sure you order the guide that comes with the block. This guide will show you everything you need to create a pattern based off this block silhouette. So the torso guide has a section on draping, how to create different design features like ruffles and flounces, belts, collars. It will show you how to rotate darts, how to create different necklines like cow necklines, and I'll show you how to finish your pattern too. So it has everything you need to create any design based off this block. So it'll keep you very busy.